Now available in paperback and e-readers, Esteem Horror in the Hamptons. The aspiring angel tries to escape a house of horrors in this action-packed, all-new Esteem series adventure. Get your copy of Esteem Horror in the Hamptons in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere. Better get the coleslaw, y'all, cause we're having us a barbecue. Hollywood continues to remain in a slump in 2024. Now, 2023 was one of the worst years in Hollywood's history as related to box office and TV ratings, and 2024 continues to show that continued trajectory of a decline. Now, 2024 was supposed to be a year where Hollywood hoped to correct things as related to its financial issues at the box office and its ratings in television, with the whole year being filled with settlements after the WGA and SAG strikes. Unfortunately, what's happening at Hollywood as related to its box office and TV ratings is that audiences still aren't engaging with the content that they're producing. Now, there was a lot of hype regarding the new X-Men 97 animated reboot of the 1990s X-Men animated series on Disney+. However, that didn't really turn into big ratings for the Disney Plus streaming service because X-Men 97 turns out to be a major flop for Disney, doing worse ratings than other Marvel Studios programs that had been critically panned and basically turned off a lot of fans, such as Echo and She-Hulk Attorney at Law and Ms. Marvel. And at the box office, Hollywood studios have been struggling to get their audiences back into theaters because this Memorial Day weekend basically was one of the worst Memorial Day weekends in history. Now, this Memorial Day weekend turned out to be a major disaster with the worst opening numbers in 30 years. While Garfield became the #1 movie at the box office, its numbers were far below that of MCU movies and movies from many other studios over the last 30 years. Now, Garfield opened with a $31 million opening, which was much lower than last week's If, which opened as a #1 movie, and it basically at $31 million was far below what studios projected it to do as related to being a family movie. Now, that number is low, but the number for the most anticipated movie, the Mad Max sequel Furiosa, was even worse, with that movie basically flopping at the box office, costing over $136 million, but could only get a $10 million opening on opening day and opening at $25 million. Now, that comes a week right after The Fall Guy opened up at the box office, again another $136 million movie, and that movie wound up flopping at the box office last week with barely a $30 million opening or $25 million opening, and these anemic openings basically are showing that there is a real serious problem as related to the content that Hollywood is producing, because what I believe that the problem at Hollywood isn't with the audience, it's with the executives who are currently running the entertainment industry, and many of these executives who are running the entertainment industry based on the content that they've greenlit show us all how tone deaf and disconnected they are from the audience. Because the big problem I see with the whole slate of movies that they had been presenting way back as 2023 is that they don't really answer that critical question that most audiences want answered before they go out here and put money on a movie ticket. And that's the question a screenwriter like myself has to answer before I put my fingers to the keyboard to write a script. And that question is, why should we care? Now, why should the audience care about the movies that are coming out this year? I don't really see much of a reason to care about movies that are basically sequels of sequels or reboots of old 30 to 40-year-old concepts. I don't really see a reason for the audience to get excited about product that basically is a repackaging of a product from 30 years ago or 40 years ago. basically these products basically are made to resonate with Gen Xers like myself, but don't really connect with people from today's generation, such as Generation Z, Gen Y, or Generation Alpha. That was really shown with the X-Men 97 numbers, where we had people saying that most people from Gen Z were not really interested in the X-Men. And again, why would people who are a part of Gen Z be interested in a reboot of a 30-year-old animated show featuring characters that they basically have no connection to? And people had no connection to those characters due to the whole slump in the comic book industry that has been going on for the last 30 years that really alienated a lot of people from comics due to the bad editorial that gave us many of the bad storylines. And many of those kids really don't have a connection to these characters who they haven't seen in a product in over 30 years. That's a big problem I'm seeing that comes from the executives who basically have not really understood that you have to connect people to characters and you have to make it where something resonates with them. I mean, you're making products for an entirely different generation, a generation that is currently a group of adults, and while that group of adults is caught up in their nostalgia, they are not the younger customers that you really need in order to maintain the entertainment business. No, much of the products you have out in Hollywood right now, all of these sequels and reboots of older concepts, basically are products for an older audience, and they're going to skew for an older audience that, yes, they may remember the X-Men from 1992 to 1997, or they may remember the 1980s TV show The Fall Guy, or they may remember an old 1980s character like Garfield. Yes, those older people will remember those characters, but those characters were made for another previous generation. They weren't really made to speak to the kids of today. And that's the big problem I'm seeing with Hollywood. They're not really talking to the younger audience, and they're not giving the younger audience a reason to care about any of the content that they're producing. I mean, when you have products and concepts from over 40 years ago, that's not really going to connect with younger customers. I mean, I saw this with Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, which came out before the summer movie season started, and I looked at that movie, and yes, it was an entertaining looking movie as related to the trailers, but it was a movie from the night based on a 1980s concept, but it just didn't connect with customers of today who don't really see their stories and their experiences being presented on screen. No, most folks who are younger are looking at these movie posters and movie trailers and not seeing a movie they can get excited about. Now, you have a lot of Hollywood executives who want to say that the reason why they had the worst opening in 30 years was because there was no MCU movie on the schedule, and I have to call BS on that. No, the reason why you had the worst opening in 30 years wasn't because there was an MCU movie on the schedule. No, it was because you have no fresh concepts on your schedule at all. No, what's happened is that the MCU made a lot of studio executives lazy, and it made them lazy because they thought they could just go out here and have a guaranteed formula, just like they thought they could have a guaranteed formula with these old 40-year-old concepts that like Garfield and the Fall Guy and many of these other things like Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. They've gotten really lazy as related to picking concepts, and as they've gotten lazy because they thought they could get a guaranteed box office opening based on an MCU movie or some nostalgia bait, what has happened is that these studios basically took their audience for granted. And that's one of the things you never want to do as a person who is in entertainment. You never want to take your audience for granted, because what you thought would be a hit could turn out to be a piece of crap. And that's what I saw back in 1990, where everybody thought RoboCop 2, and Total Recall were going to dominate the box office. However, in 1990, it was Pretty Woman and Ghost that were the number 1 and number 2 movies for that year. And that's the other problem with Hollywood these days, is that you have these executives who are just bean counters looking to get a movie to be a hit based on a formula. And instead of them producing unique movies, these movies are coming off like the assembly line, similar to that of GM's Chevrolet Citation, Pontiac Phoenix, and Oldsmobile Forenza and Buick Skylark, cars that basically were supposed to save GM, but turned out to be the biggest pieces of crap ever made in the automaker's history because of their uninspired design, their underpowered engines, their crappy plastic interiors, and just horrible ride quality. Most people really revile those cars because they were just complete garbage, and that's because the people at GM really couldn't adapt to the marketplace when Japanese imports and German imports came in with smaller, more fuel-efficient cars and cars that had better interiors and better ride quality. But the problem over at GM is that their people there were detached and disconnected, similar to the way today's Hollywood executives are, because with today's Hollywood executives, they're just completely detached and disconnected from the audience, and because they're indifferent and don't care, they give us the same products that nobody cares about, and these products don't really excite people to the point where people are feeling like they have to go out here and spend money to go see these movies. Because, again, why should people care about watching a TV series like X-Men 97, which is based on a TV show that came on 30 years ago? I mean, why should a kid from Gen Z or a kid from Generation Alpha be interested in a concept that they have not even seen in their lives? Why should they care when there's no X-Men comics on the comic store shelves? And there's no really any comic book stores anymore. I mean, there are no comic book stores to get people excited about this series that's coming on TV. So there's no built-in audience like there was back in 1992 when you had comic shops all over the place and you had comics sold on newsstands and in drugstores where people could get excited and go, oh, the X-Men are coming on TV. No, in 2024, when it comes to the X-Men, the entire book has been made a complete mess with the Krakoa era, and the TV series basically is coming from 30 years ago, so there's a real disconnect over on as related to X-Men. That's one of the reasons why the ratings never took off. The ratings never took off because basically this show was based on something from 30 years ago, and the audience today has no real personal connection to it to say, these are my heroes, these are heroes I get excited about, these are heroes I care about. Again, you don't have that reason to care about X-Men 97, just like people didn't have a reason to care about the Ghostbusters Frozen Empire to the point where they wanted to make that movie a blockbuster because that was a product, again, from 30 plus years ago. And when it came to The Fall Guy, I mean, this was a show that came on when I was a kid back in 1982 and starred Lee Majors, who was a big deal back then because the $6 Million Man just went off the air and Lee Majors was coming back. So that was, again, over 30, 40 years ago. So nobody knows who Colt Seavers is. I mean, most of the people who know who Colt Seavers is are in a retirement home or a graveyard. So it's hard for people to care about The Fall Guy when most of the people who watch The Fall Guy have fallen into a grave, and the other people have one foot on a banana peel and the other one in the grave right next to them. So it's hard to sell a product to people who don't really care about it. And that's one of the big problems that many Hollywood executives have, because what I see with many Hollywood executives is that they really don't have a good scale or scope as related to time, something I had to learn myself as a writer. Okay, yes, I grew up in the 80s, I was a young adult in the 90s and early 2000s, but I have to understand that time is passing, and what was cool 30 or 40 years ago is not going to resonate to today. No. What resonated back in 1982 as cool, what resonated in 1984 as cool, what resonated in 1997 as cool is not going to be something that people pick up on 2024, and that's why we have movies like Garfield, which they were anticipating to be a big hit with kids. They don't understand. You made a Garfield movie, I think, back in the 90s, and I think you made with Bill Murray as the voice, and I think you made another one in 2000. So why would anybody care about a Garfield movie when we've already had two previous Garfield movies? And back in the 80s, we had Garfield animated series. I mean, why should I care about this character when I know that basically I can just not pass on this one and wait for the next one? That's the other problem I'm seeing with a lot of these franchises when they do these reboots. What happens is the audience becomes to the point where they start taking the product for granted, and they take the product for granted because if they say, okay, if I don't like that version, similar to what's happening with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, people don't really like the one with the black April O'Neil, so they're passing on that one. And the same thing is happening with Ghostbusters with 2016. Okay, I don't like Ghostbusters 2016, which is now on Tubi right now for free, and they pass on that and go wait for the next one. Again, when you go out here and keep making the same products over and over again, you basically make it where those products aren't special, and once the product stops being special, people don't care anymore, and when they don't care anymore, what happens is you wind up losing in the end, because either people are gonna they're gonna wait to see if the program is gonna come on a streaming service for free or come on a streaming service when there's a deal for $2.99 a month, but they're not excited enough to say, hey, I want to go to the theater and go see this movie because this movie isn't something that I really am excited enough to care about. That's the big problem I'm seeing with Hollywood these days. You're not making products people care about because, again, with sequels and reboots, you can basically take them or leave them. But if you really want to sell customers, you've got to give them something that they want to take their money and take it to the theater to go spend at the theater. But that's not being done right now over at these studios. And a lot of these executives want to make excuses saying that it was the WGA and SAG strikes. No, you had problems before the WGA and SAG strikes in making content nobody wanted. And even worse, even though as you were making content nobody wanted, people stopped trusting these studios to give them quality content because of all of the far leftist social justice narratives that were woven into that content. Another reason not to care because the people can't trust the content, especially as related to family movies like Lightyear, which basically was one that alienated a lot of people because it had a lot of these references to things that people didn't want their kids to be exposed to. And right now, people don't trust Hollywood as one. That's one part of it. But the other part is that you have content that is way too old. And again, when you have content that is based on concepts from 30 or 40 years ago, it's not going to excite people because people will, one, take that content for granted because that content really isn't from their generation, and two, that content really doesn't speak to the people who you want to speak to, the younger people, and three, you're just not really presenting something that people can say is their own. I mean, one of the things about being a Gen X who grew up in the 80s is I could say, hey, most of these characters that I grew up with, Transformers, G.I. Joe, Thundercats, and many characters like Jem and Real Ghostbusters and even Filmation's Ghostbusters, these were the characters of my generation, including the Smurfs and Voltron and the A-Team and Knight Rider. I mean, all that stuff I could say is Gen X, and even Gen Y can go say the Power Rangers belong to them, and Batman the Animated Series, and Gargoyles, and many other shows. And even the kids who came up in the 2000s can say they've got Kim Possible, they've got all of those shows like All That, and these shows like Victorious, and shows like Ben 10 and the Batman. But when it comes to the later generations, there's nobody making anything special for those kids, and that's why those kids just don't care about what's on the streaming services, because nobody is making anything new, because Hollywood has become filled with bean counters who are afraid of taking a risk. And that's really ironic, because the entire business of entertainment is all about risk, and it's all about taking risks on things that are fresh and new. But we don't see much fresh and new when we look at a schedule filled with sequels and reboots and remakes. I mean, there's nothing really special on that 2024 box office schedule that can make you say, hey, this looks so exciting, I've got to go see it. Like when I saw the trailer for Captain America Civil War. I mean, when I saw the trailer for Captain America Civil War, it was just, that trailer was so compelling, but sadly that was the beginning of the end of the MCU, and Bob Iger, not being a visionary, couldn't see a direction he wanted to take his company in, because if I were running Disney, once that Civil War started, the end of the Infinity Saga, the end of Act 2 of the Infinity Saga, I would have been coming out with fresh, new animated series, hand-drawn animated series, similar to anime, with a bit more of adult themes and adult content, taking more of those risks that Disney did in the 90s, and I also would have been coming out with brand new concepts as related to live action. This is something that Michael Eisner did, and focusing on more smaller budgeted projects to be able to bluster the bigger budgeted MCU. I mean, I would have been looking to go out here and expand by looking to get new concepts out there, but Bob Iger played it safe, and as he played it safe, he basically put Disney on the brink, and also and the other studio executives put their studios on the brink, playing it safe, when right now is the time to be exploring new concepts, new characters, and looking to find out what resonates with Gen Z and Generation Alpha, brand new concepts and brand new characters, and not rehashing old characters from 30 years ago and 40 years ago, because, again, while a lot of us, again, love those characters from back in the day, we have to understand that those characters that we loved back then are the equivalent of what, when I was growing up, they were talking about Green Hornet and Tarzan and the Lone Ranger. I mean, each generation has its own pop culture, and the sad part is that we're not allowing every other future generation to have their own pop culture. That's the big problem that's really impeding Hollywood's box office, and you will continue to open movies poorly if you continue to make films and TV shows that appeal to older characters. Again, older characters, it's hard to make them resonate because they come from another time, and that's what's really affecting Hollywood's box office and making it where we're having this slump. We're having this slump because, again, you have people who are in these executive offices who are detached and disconnected. Either they want to make old 40-year-old concepts and remake them for today, or we have a lot of people who want to make a lot of art house crap movies filled with far left social justice narratives. There's nobody there looking to make content for the average everyday person who basically has no reason to go spend money at the theater right now while they're dealing with issues as related to inflation. I mean, right now the average everyday American doesn't have much incentive to go to the movies these days. Like here in the Bronx, you only have one movie theater in the entire borough, and you have to basically travel halfway across town to go to it, or you have to get on a train and go to Manhattan. I mean, that doesn't really incentivize people whose money is tight, and with the average everyday American's money being tight, they don't have incentive to go down to a theater to spend $18 to $20 on a movie ticket for a mid-movie that they could basically save a bunch of money on by waiting for it to come to streaming, where they can get, again, a deal for $2.99 a month for Disney Plus or Hulu or Max, which when I look at those streaming services, not much content on there these days, and that's the big problem. You're not producing content that makes people care enough to say, hey, I want to take some time off on my weekend to go see this movie. No, you're not giving me content that really makes me go, oh, I gotta see that. That's so different and unique. No, what we're getting are these factory assembly line movies that, again, we can take or leave, and take or leave because, yeah, there'll be another one coming out soon. And if I miss this one, I'll get the next one. And if I can miss that one, you've basically failed as an executive. You failed because the whole thing is if people can start taking your product for granted, then they don't really have a reason to take themselves to the theater to go see your movies. And it's clear that Hollywood can make movies people care about because Spider-Man No Way Home basically was a blockbuster. There are movies that did do well, like your Barbies and your Oppenheimers, but the whole thing is that Hollywood doesn't want to make those movies because what they want to do is, again, play it safe. And if you want to play it safe, this isn't the business for you. No, when it comes to writing and things and being creative, you want to come out of the box. You want to come with something fresh and different. And that's the big problem that's hurting Hollywood right now. And again, your box office will continue to melt down until you go out here and give people exactly what they want, which is something fresh, different, and exciting. If you can't give somebody something fresh and different, then you're really going to be in a pickle. And again, the problems at Hollywood have to do with the executives at the top. Executives who basically have been there too long, like Bob Iger, who should have gone a long time ago. And many of the other executives who are disconnected and detached don't see the realities of the kind of content that they're producing and don't see how that content they're producing is not content that the customer truly cares about. Now, if you want to pick up some of my books on the SJS Direct imprint, including those in the SJS Direct universe, such as the ISIS series, the Esteem series, the John Haynes series, the books of the Spinsterella trilogy, my Black sorority novel, The Thetas, my Black vampire novel, Eternal Night, and my other Black business book, A Recipe for Success, you can find all of those books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find them at other online booksellers like Draft the Digital, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, and big box retailers like Walmart and Target. And if you want to try out the first full John Haynes comic, John Haynes at Death's Door, you can find that comic on Lulu.com in paperback for the same price as it was on the 2022 Kickstarter. And if you want to try out my first digital comic, Esteem No Good Deed, you can find that comic on Kindle for 99 cents on Amazon.com. And if you want to help me to be able to continue producing comics and make more videos about the entertainment industry, you can drop a donation to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback at e-readers, ISIS, Dark Incubus. The goddess next door gets enthralled in a romantic entanglement with an evil incubus in this all-new ISIS series adventure. Get your copy of ISIS Dark Incubus in paperback and e-readers today. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.